here are the X number of things that we need to consider. And here's exactly how I would go about making the decision and making it quickly. That's how you take, I don't know the answer, to having a point of view and explaining it and getting your credibility amplified because of how you approached it.
Adam, welcome back. Another episode.
Here we are, episode 25, man. Excited. Good to see you.
That's right. Good to see you, man.
We've got a guest with us today, which is exciting. But before we introduce who that is, we just want to welcome everybody to the podcast, the RevOps Recruiters podcast, where our goal is to provide insights and best practices around finding, hiring, and retaining top revenue operations talent.
That's right. We're your hosts, Adam and David from RevSearch.
Yeah. So introduce who we've got with us today.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to introduce Ted GRulikowski, CRO, revenue leader, currently at Clearstar, a PE-backed SaaS company in the human capital space.
Yeah.
And really excited to have him on the podcast. We've worked with him. We've met him for lunch multiple times.
Yeah, it's kind of become a friend.
That's right. So we're really excited to get that perspective, that insight from the CRO seat, specifically around a CRO RevOps partnership.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to do just a quick high-level introduction on Ted, and then Ted, I'll hand it to you. You can fill in any gaps. The main thing that I saw in Ted's profile, and that he's confirmed through us working with him, is his focus on operational excellence as a part of go-to-market work that he's doing.
Yeah.
A lot of times you find one, but you don't see the prioritization of operations and the acknowledgement that there is a system behind go-to-market that makes everything come alive. And Ted has done this throughout his career.
Yeah.
He's been with big companies, small companies, public, private. He's been a consultant. So really excited, Ted, to have you with us. I'm going to turn it over to you. Give us a little bit more color.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And just before I get started, thanks for having me. I do consider you guys friends, and I do appreciate the work that you've done for me in the past, getting me just some great guys. And just a quick plug to my revenue ops director, John Lavoie, which I would not have found with you guys. And I really do appreciate it. He makes a huge difference for our company. So thrilled to have him.
Yeah, that's great.
Great.
So talk a little bit about your background. Give us a little more detail there.
Yeah, I'll give it a shot. So I've been in go-to-market sales, marketing growth focused type roles for, last 20 years or so. Very early in my career with big companies like GE and Ford. Then I spent several years at running a high-end B2B sales outsourcing business where we literally built a business that recruited, and ran, inside and field sales teams, close to like 1,000 people working for all sorts of companies like AT&T and Avaya and DuPont and Ford and Cisco and Google and a bunch of smaller ones. And as you can imagine, running a sales business for other companies, data and operational excellence and being able to prove your value is absolutely critical. So that was, really formative time for me to understand how important operations really is. And that business grew from about under 100 million to over 300 million. It was a really fun ride with some great people that are, still some of my closest friends. And then from there, I went into the consulting space where I was a principal at SBI, Sales Benchmark Index, or I guess now known as SBI Growth. That was like a PhD in go-to-market where I sold consulting services and led teams doing strategy work with a lot of name brand PE firms, big ones, did some, go-to-market due diligence for M&A, really interesting stuff with brilliant people that I learned a ton from. And that got me into the PE space in a way that probably no other role could. After SBI, ironically, was sold to a PE firm. I got in the tech space a bit and jumped on the AI wave before it was as much of a buzzword as it is now, with a messaging company called LivePerson, and then been a CRO at two different PE-backed companies, which is what I'm doing now at Clearstar. We're a leader in the background drug and health screening business in the U.S. and globally, and we're backed by Hanover Investors, which is just a fantastic PE firm with a lot of great people out of London that I'm really fortunate to work with and learn a lot from.
Yeah. Man, what a journey. That's fantastic. Well, we're excited to have you on the podcast. We love that you'll be able to bring a perspective that we can't. David and I have never been CROs. We talked to a lot of CROs, but we've never been there and done that. And so we love that you'll be able to speak to that. So David, kind of set it up. What are we going to be covering today with Ted?
Absolutely. So we've, like Ted said, we've worked together. We've partnered on these RevOps hires. So there's a deep passion here for revenue operations. So what we wanted to cover today is we wanted to get his perspective on specifically the CRO and RevOps partnership, what makes a great partnership, And then also, what does a great RevOps CRO partnership look like and in a private equity environment? So those are kind of the two high level things we're going to cover, and we're going to have some great takeaways from both of those sections. Ted's put some great keys in place here that hopefully our viewers will be able to take with them and really insightful stuff. So I'd say let's just get it kicked off. Let's get right into it. So Ted, the first thing that you mentioned in our conversations was under this RevOps and CRO partnership was 1 + 1 = 3, which is not just bad math. So unpack that for us.
Yeah, it would be kind of bad form for me to start a revenue operations podcast not even knowing how to add 1 + 1, but I promise it means something.
That's right.
Yeah, it's this idea that you got to trust that 1 + 1 = 3. And what I mean is, combining the historical strengths of a CRO role and a RevOps role. One's generally more quantitative, one's maybe a little bit more qualitative and storytelling. If you can combine the strengths of those two roles together, it amplifies both and it actually gives you a better perspective and you get better outcomes that produce better results. When you combine the two, it kind of produces an exponential effect. And you need it to do it correctly. It's kind of like three legs of a stool. The more balanced that quantitative, qualitative, and storytelling leg is of the stool, especially when you're in a really complex matrix-driven environment, which honestly, good revenue operations leaders are. They touch all the different functional groups of a business. They're touching a bunch of different stakeholders. They're talking to everybody all the time. When you can have those two things add together and amplify the positive effect, it really allows you to have more impact and get aligned in the right strategic direction.
Yeah. I mean, I love this. We see this so often, David, in the roles that we work with, where you've got a leader, CRO leader, who many times comes from a sales background. They're good at telling the story. And then you pair that with a RevOps leader who's great at really understanding what the data is saying. Bring those two together. Each of those are their own powers, but they're combined. It's almost like a superpower for that team. And so seeing RevOps leaders and CRO leaders use that together is amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Another thing you mentioned, Ted, was as a part of this relationship between CRO and RevOps is prioritization. Let's unpack that. You had a statement there: prioritize with clarity and context. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. Everybody says you got to prioritize. You got to prioritize, and I would suggest it's really never that simple. You got to think about how do you prioritize with your revenue operations partner, whether it's VP or director or manager, whatever the title is. You got to prioritize as a CRO with clarity and context. And it's really important. You got to separate that urgent versus important, busy versus impactful. Understand the big picture and how, what you're doing together impact the most important thing. I mean, if everything's a priority, nothing is. And I would tell you, sometimes the most challenging thing, especially for a revenue operations leader in a highly matrix environment that's really, really good, is to say no to the things that are not going to drive the needle on the metrics that matter. And you need to be really clear on what matters and how those decisions you make about what you're going to do and not do relate to that. That's that contextual importance. You can't just be like, well, do this because I said so. You've got to, it just doesn't work. That's not a partnership. You've got to provide clarity, and then you got to provide the context. And again, this often can be misunderstood or misapplied. Your intent and your impact can be different without that context. That's why I say you got to prioritize with clarity and context. And I suggest that when your RevOps leader and you are on the same page, it's important, the what, the why, and the when. Maybe it's less important the how. Oftentimes a really good revenue operations leader, again, I'm giving a plug to John LaVoy on my team. Oftentimes the how is less important for me because he's going to do things differently and many times better than I would. And I learn a lot from his approach because inherently we think and approach things differently, and that's great. But you got to take the time to get aligned, challenge things, talk through it. It's worth it. Again, especially for those folks that touch so many departments in a business and get pulled a million different directions at any given point in time.
Yeah. That's great. One of the things that I think about, David, when we're vetting talent, we talk a lot about what's their process for project management, right? Which is that whole idea of there's a lot of things that I could get done, but how do I prioritize what's most important? And I love the fact that, these people oftentimes are very talented and they come in an organization and it's going to be recognized. Other leaders are going to see that and they're going to be pulling on that talent. And so having that partnership with the CRO to really prioritize what's most important and what do we need to be focusing on keeps them creating impact instead of just getting caught in the whirlwind of everything that's going on.
And also the need for, Ted, I know you had mentioned in past conversations, this air coverage for your RevOps leader, right? Mm-hmm. There's the CRO or whatever senior level leader that is paired up with this RevOps leader needs to support that ongoing effort and make sure that we are streamlined, we are focusing on the right things, right? Because it can get out of balance so quickly where that leader is just doing support tickets all day long and they're no longer making an impact.
Did you talk to John before we had this call? I get it. I understand. Yeah, it's not a good use of your revenue ops leader's time to be dragging through support tickets all day long. They can have a way bigger strategic impact, and that's my job, is to make sure he's having the biggest impact he can.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, another part of this successful CRO and RevOps partnership is the storytelling aspect. You call it the narrative. Give us an idea. The data can tell a story, or the story can be told with the data. Unpack that for us.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm not saying you make stuff up here. But what I am saying is there is a difference between telling a story with data and looking at the data and figuring out what story it tells. You got to know the difference between the two and when to use either. They both have a place, but the best partnerships that I've been a part of with a RevOps leader and the CRO, you balance the two. Give you an example. If you have a really strong point of view, an initiative you're looking to get moving, or a decision you're looking to drive or influence, or a strong point you're looking to make, understanding that and actively looking at the data to find information to support it can be really important. On the flip side, you can analyze a ton of data, run some ratios and metrics and benchmarks and all that fun stuff, and you can maybe, quote unquote, more passively see what that data tells you and then build the narrative or the story around it. Both have a time and place, but you got to know the difference in when to use each approach.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I can think through a company that I was a part of years ago. We were going through a round of funding, and we had to use both of those approaches because some of it was just clearly we needed to understand the numbers and the data and provide that. But then the other side of it was there was a story we needed to tell and make sure it come across clearly, but it needed to be supported with data. So we went and found the data that supported that idea. It wasn't made up. It was very legitimately there, but the narrative drove what we were looking for in the numbers. And we use both of those at different times. And a good leader, good CRO knows when to pull each of those, and a RevOps leader helping them make sure they have access to the information that they need to support those narratives.
Yeah, and I would tell you guys, I'll give you a quick story, I guess, pun intended, recently about how I may even challenge how people think about data, because you often think about data as, numbers and information, and like I said, metrics, ratios, benchmarks, all that kind of stuff, which it absolutely is. Yeah. But when you're dealing with, private equity folks, you got your board members, you got all your internal stakeholders. All those people and all those personalities consume information differently, and you need to be nimble and agile enough to speak in a way and communicate in a way that's effective for all of them. One example where we looked at data differently is, we put in a win-loss process. Not rocket science. A lot of companies do it. It's really important. If you're not doing it, you absolutely should. And part of that, using technology, right, we can record those conversations. Yeah. So imagine going into a board meeting and you just did a call with a prospect that talked about why you won, or some cases even more impactfully, why you lost. You're in a board meeting, you're going through a slide deck, you pause. You play the quote of the customer actually talking about the issue or the point you're looking to make. You want to tell about a powerful way to deliver a message in a board meeting. You do that and you've just changed the game. So again, you're trying to use the data, and I would suggest think about data more broadly than just numbers. Use the data to tell the story. Imagine sitting in a room. It's no longer about me. It's no longer my opinion. You can't argue about it. It's objective. It's the customer's voice, literally in the room. It's captivating. If you're not doing it, try it.
Yeah, I had another leader that I was talking to say it's about taking the emotion out of go-to-market. This idea you're able to put something together that is objective, that is rooted in truth, and it's hard to push that away. You can get more effective and you can get things done with, objective narratives. Yeah. So that's
100%.
great. Well, let's take the conversation to the next stage here of what are the keys to a CRO RevOps team being successful in a PE environment? So the first thing that you mentioned was speed wins. We know there's high expectations, right, from the PE side. I mean, we're working with PE firms, and portcos are under a lot of pressure to deliver and answer really tough questions around data. So what do you mean by speed wins?
Yeah, what I would tell you is you got to move the ball forward. And it's this idea that imperfect action beats perfect inaction every time. You got to act with a sense of urgency. Don't let perfection get in the way in progress. People have heard all those phrases, but especially in this kind of environment, it's absolutely critical. You've got to get things moving forward. Getting something started often takes a ton of energy and work, but it's the key. After the movement started, sometimes, most of the time, I would tell you, maybe it's a little bit less work and less energy to keep it going. And I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations with people after they waffle on a decision and they wait and they wait and they go back and forth and they debate it and then they finally make it. Then after the fact, 99% of the time, guess what? They wish they would have done it earlier. And I'd say, even if the decision is wrong, and by the way, you're not perfect, you're going to get decisions wrong, and that's fine. But make it, learn from it, and iterate fast to get to a better decision. Doing that quickly is almost always better than waiting and not making the decision and not taking the action in the first place. In a PE environment, like these firms inherently operate under a timetable. Regardless if it's a really fast due diligence period and you got to consume a ton of information, come up with a point of view, a value creation plan, leverage you can pull, all that stuff so that they can figure out the value that they're going to bid on this company. A 100-day plan, or even a 3 or 5 year hold before an exit, which seems like a long time, but in the grand scheme of things, it's pretty short. Every hour, every day, every week, every month, every year matters. You've got to move at a pretty quick pace. I could go on and on and on. It's how they operate. You want to be successful? I would tell you, act the same way. Forward motion, speed wins. This is a poor analogy, but in the sports world, they joke you can't teach speed. It's intangible. It's built into you. You operate with a sense of urgency or you don't. It's a very hard thing to get people to just do if they don't naturally act that way. And I would tell you, in this world, you need to have a sense of urgency and that action-oriented mindset. One thing I love about working with guys like you is you guys get it. And you're not going to bring myself or others candidates that don't have this mindset because it doesn't work in this world.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. We actually, you have a background working with SBI. We were looking at an article that they put out a little while ago. We did a podcast where it talked about the average amount of time that a CRO has, average tenures, 18, 19 months. The reality is the clock is ticking.
It reminded me. I get it. Guys, I get it. Yeah, I know.
yeah, exactly. Preaching to the choir here. But the clock starts ticking day one, and every moment that you delay is a day that you're not going to get back. It's not going to be tagged on at the end. And one of the things that we talked about is every right move you make, or even a wrong move that you learn from and iterate and learn for the next move. When you make a right move, you buy yourself a little bit more time. But these companies, these PE companies, are not looking for folks that are just going to sit around and say, we'll push that out to next quarter. We'll push that out to the beginning of next year. They want action. They want return now. So,
yeah, what just came to my mind, I love what you just said. The small, you have this tiny window of time to really get up and going, right? You have to move incredibly fast. And the RevOps leader really is the key to that, right? Is the core skill set of a RevOps leader is to continuously improve things, to solve problems, to execute. And if you compare back to that partnership, if you compare that execution side to that strategy side that the CRO drives, it really does get you up and going faster than you would on your own.
For sure.
Yeah, no, that's great. Another thing you mentioned, Ted, was the statement of have a point of view. Every executive must have a point of view. Give us some more detail around that.
Yeah, what I would tell you is, you got to have a point of view, and what your point of view actually is oftentimes might be less important than actually just having one. And you got to have the quantitative and qualitative information to back it up. Like I mentioned a few minutes ago, think of data differently, win-loss interviews, customers' perspectives. Data can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Don't be narrow-minded with it. And look, you're not always going to be correct, but when you have a point of view, you're going to have respect. One of my former leaders and mentors from my time in consulting, Matt Shares, if you're out there listening to this, this one's for you. He would repeat this phrase often, and it really taught me a lesson that I carry with me. If you're an executive, you're paid to have a point of view, whether it's based on your experience, research, data, advice your network provided, questions you've asked others, whatever it is, have one. That doesn't mean that you're always going to have the answer. Again, you're not always going to have the answer. And it's okay to say you don't have the answer, but have a point of view with some level of conviction, even if it is, I don't know the answer, but here are the X number of things that we need to consider. And here's exactly how I would go about making the decision and making it quickly. That's how you take, I don't know the answer, to having a point of view and explaining it and getting your credibility amplified because of how you approached it. It inspires confidence, it garners respect, it shows leaderships. It's amazing how many people regularly, even executives, have no point of view and are passengers in what I call the business train, and they're hesitant to make a decision. They're changing their mind, they're creating doubt, versus those that are setting the direction and driving it with conviction, inspiring confidence, and moving forward. If you want to succeed in the PE world, I would tell you embrace the latter versus the former.
I love two words that stood out there, the conviction side of it. And, you talked about also being willing to change that point of view when needed, when the data shows that. I was listening to a podcast this morning he's a scientist, Peter Attia, talks a lot about health and longevity, but one of the statements that he says all the time is strong convictions held loosely. And so what he talks about is, as an MD, they're constantly doing research. Things are constantly changing. So you strongly hold to the conviction of what the data shows today until the data shows something later on. He said, with scientists, we constantly have to change, and that's okay. But believe in what you believe in right now and hold that conviction strongly. And then when the data shows you something new, be willing to change with that. So I love this idea.
Yeah, I'm going to steal that quote if you don't mind. That's a good one.
Not mine. Peter Attia, strong convictions held loosely.
Fair enough. I like it.
Next thing I want you to talk about is this idea of less is more, and specifically in the PE context.
Yeah, there's two ways to think about it. Kind of like I mentioned earlier, if everything is a priority, then nothing is. And look, if you're a talented revenue operations leader in a highly matrix environment, you're going to get pressure to do everything for everyone, be involved with everything, and so on. That doesn't work in a really fast-paced, high-pressure environment that this world often is. You're going to get burnt out. So you need to understand what matters and what has the biggest impact and what you're ultimately responsible for delivering. And you've got to relentlessly focus on it. Execute like crazy on the 2 or 3 most critical, high-impactful activities that are going to drive the results you need, even if it's at the expense of everything else. Busy doesn't necessarily mean productive or impactful. You see this when people sometimes leave companies and everybody's paranoid about what's not going to get done. Then 60 days later, you find out it really wasn't that big a deal because that person that was insanely busy, working all the time, putting all this effort into things that don't drive the critical needle, that stuff doesn't get done and it doesn't matter. And when decisions are made about who gets promoted, hired, paid, bonus, equity, all that fun stuff, the people that ultimately are remembered and recognized are those folks that deliver on those critical objectives. So I'd ask the question, would you rather be known for taking on a ton of activity, working 100-hour weeks and missing the ultimate objective? Or would you rather be known for exceeding your objective because you focused on a few things that really mattered and perhaps some other things at the end of the day didn't get done and they don't really matter? I know my choice. Sometimes it can be super difficult. In the short term, you're going to get pushback and it's going to feel uneasy, especially in the revenue operations seat, but you need to have a leader, whether it's a CRO, CCO, whatever it is, that has that air cover. But I'm telling you, this approach almost always worked out, longer term with one caveat. You got to deliver on that high priority item. And if you're good, you're going to.
As you were speaking there, I was thinking of one of my favorite business books is called The 4 Disciplines of Execution. And one of the things they talk about is the idea of the whirlwind, right? It's everything that's happening. It's that busyness. It's the things of the business that are constantly pulling on you. But the idea, the concept of the book is that if you don't learn to focus on what they call a wildly important goal, if you don't learn to focus on these 2, 3, 4 things that are going to have the greatest impact on the business, if nothing else changes, everything stays exactly the same except for those 2 or 3 things. If you can't learn to focus on those things, you're never going to move the business forward. And so as leaders, we've got a choice. We can choose to be caught up in the whirlwind and just stay busy, and our days get filled up. And at the end of the day, we feel like, oh, sure, we got some stuff done. But we look back after 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and we realize the needle never really moved forward. So they would say focus on the wildly important and try to push away that whirlwind.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's a second really good catchphrase. That's why you host the podcast and I'm on the podcast. That's another good one. It's another good one I'm going to steal, right? What did you say? Strong convictions held loosely, avoid the whirlwind. I got it. Those are great sound bites, and I appreciate that.
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. Well, I think we got a bonus point, right?
We do. So when it comes to, looking at the relationship with work and all the work we're doing, we want to be all in, but you made an interesting statement that basically said care, but not that much. So explain that to us.
Yeah. People may think I'm crazy with this, so take it with a grain of salt. And this again is something that a mentor of mine who I really appreciate will go unnamed on this one, but if you're listening, you know who you are. Really taught me this lesson. It's been really impactful, and I know we've had a lot of conversations about business, and at the end of the day, that's what this is about. This is this maybe blends the business with the personal side a bit because I think it's important. And it was important and hard lesson for me to learn over time. And I think it applies maybe in a PE world more so than most business environments. Look, you got to have a passion for what you're doing. You need to care about your team, your customers, your prospects, and the business for sure, to a point. But, and this is a huge but, don't forget that your identity and your worth is not tied to your job. Don't let what can sometimes be like a crazy, hectic, fast paced, extremely accountable environment impact your most important relationships with your family, your kids, your close friends, and definitely don't let it impact your health. The stress can be and is real, and it can snowball before you even know it. Trust me, I know. And again, it takes a little courage to even have this conversation. And it certainly
Yeah.
takes some courage to take care, but not that much. But it has meaning. Pay attention to the signs, whatever that means for you. And it's different for everybody. Get ahead of it and manage it. Again, PE companies, maybe more so than most, can make really fast headcount decisions, sometimes out of nowhere, that can impact your job. If you find yourself in a situation where that happens, it doesn't mean you aren't great at what you do. It doesn't necessarily mean you didn't have an incredibly positive impact. It means the business made a decision, right or wrong, to do something different. That's fine. But it's a business. And that's how they treat it. And that's how you need to treat it. Learn to care, but not that much. Again, however that applies to you, it's a balance. And finding that balance isn't easy, but I would suggest it's one of the most important things you can do and be aware of.
Man, it's just such good advice. I mean, I'm sure we could go sit around, have a beer, and tell war stories of, different things that we've seen or even experienced. I just think of, there was a company that I worked for, and the company was not going well towards the end, and I was willing to go down with the ship, right? And I got a call one day, and they said, "Today's your last day." And I thought, what in the world? Do you know all the things that I do? How are you going to? But the reality was, it was just a business decision. And once I realized that, I realized there was something I heard before that, and it had so much more meaning once that happened. The thing that I'd heard was, you're never as good as they say you are, and you're never as bad as they say you are. And you realized, well, I'm just going to show up, do the best I can when I show up, but my identity is not wrapped around how this company performs or what they think of me or the job that I have, right? And so I love that. Those are great words, Ted.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of like you mentioned earlier, you're in the whirlwind. I told you I'm going to start stealing that one. If you're in the whirlwind, this can be really hard to remember. It really can, but you got to have mentors or leaders or listen to podcasts like this one or call people like you guys. And sometimes you need people to remind you, again, you got to care, just maybe not that much.
That's good.
Well, one final ask here, Ted. I know, based on our conversation today and based on what we know about you, you care deeply about the RevOps role, and it's essential in what you do to make you effective. And that relation, that partnership is essential in go-to-market. What would you say to those leaders that may not have prioritized it yet, or haven't figured it out yet, or are still thinking, do I really need this operator, this quant on my team, and how does that look? What would you say to folks out there that are still thinking through this?
First thing I'd say is you're about 15 years behind. You better catch up. But in all seriously, but maybe a little bit more detail behind that. I mean, if you look at the amount of information that is getting thrown at executives, certainly on the go-to-market side, you look at, I mentioned the buzzword earlier, AI, the complicated tech stack. I mean, my God, I get like 15 calls a day from these tech companies that probably 100 after this podcast, by the way, and I'll blame that on you guys. But you can't possibly keep track of it. And the other thing I would tell you is not just how important the revenue operations function is for a CRO, but oftentimes the sales function, the revenue function, it's one of the most cross-functional organizations in a business because whether it's finance or accounting or operations or product or whoever it is, they all want information out of that team because we're generally the closest to the customer, have the most real-time feedback, and you generate the revenue for the company. So from a private equity firm's perspective, you're pretty darn important, maybe right under the CFO in a lot of PE's worlds. So that revenue operations leader, a good one, which again, another plug to John LaVoy and my team, a good one is going to be able to take all that information from all those places and turn that information into actionable data that drives results and produces the outcomes you want. And if you don't have somebody that does that, honestly, in today's day and age, I don't know how you can keep up. I couldn't without a good one, not in a big company, even a medium-sized company. Even, in some cases, even smaller sized companies, depending on the vertical that you play in, it's an absolutely critical role.
Couldn't have said it better ourselves.
Great. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you on, Ted. Thanks so much for carving out some time to join us here and just so much insight from you. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And maybe before we quit, and again, you can call this a plug, whatever it is, but I appreciate what you guys have done for me, and you've given me the ability to have just some outstanding leaders that have really made a huge difference for me in my career, and hopefully I've helped them out a bit too. So it's been a good partnership for sure. But I appreciate it, and again, I can tell you, John's done a fantastic job, and I would not have found him without you guys. So thanks for that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Our pleasure. Awesome, man. Well, Ted, thanks so much for the insight, and we enjoyed it. Thanks for being here.
See you guys.
See you, Ted.
Bye, Ted. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the RevOps Recruiters podcast. If you found the information in this episode helpful, please consider subscribing. You can do that on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, if you have comments or suggestions for future podcasts, we'd love to hear them. Please put those in the comments section on YouTube. Finally, if you're looking to hire your first or next RevOps leader, we'd love to help. You can connect with us through our website at www.revsearch.io. Thanks again for listening.